Welcome to 032 Conversations, the podcast where we talk to creatives, see how they live, and how they do their work. I'm your host, Carlo Villarica. Actually, yes, I am the host, but this episode is going to be a little different. Okay, it's going to be a lot different. It started when my friend, Kahlil Corazo, if you've been listening since the very beginning, he was the first person on the podcast, episode 1 of 032 Conversations. And Kahlil and I have known each other for a few years now. In fact, this is not my first podcast. We had a podcast back in 2016 called The Third World Startup, where we talked a lot about entrepreneurship, business in a third world setting. About once a month or so, I meet Kahlil in a thing called a mastermind. Basically, it's a support group for entrepreneurs or like-minded people like me and Kahlil. And it allows us an avenue to share where we are in our lives and our businesses. And it also gives us accountability. It's a great way to find out new things. And a lot of I feel like a lot of 032's success, quote unquote, is really attributed to the mastermind and allowing me to learn things from other people who are smarter than me, and then just it's a whole bunch of help. I don't think I'm giving the term mastermind. I don't think I'm giving the term justice. I'm going to link to maybe an article or so about mastermind in the show notes. But anyway, this whole podcast is not going to be about mastermind. I wanted to put it out there because it's good for you. Kahlil will soon be venturing into cacao. In fact, he'll be taking his master's. His plan is to focus on cacao fermentation. So, if you happen to be interested in cacao or chocolate, email him at bio@corazo.org. That's bio@corazo.org. And maybe connect. And, maybe you'll have questions for him. Maybe you can help him somehow. Maybe he can help you. Either way, the reason why I'm talking about Kahlil is because he's going to be the one doing the interview with this guy, Vassily Lissouba. I hope I'm saying his name right, because I never met the guy. So, this is how this interview came about. This is going to be Kahlil's words. I'm going to read it. So, just before a trip to Davao, a post from someone I knew, this is Kahlil, from the Manila tech startup scene popped up in LinkedIn. His name is Kenneth Reyes Lau. Turned out, Kenneth left corporate Makati along with his wife 5 years ago to start a cacao farm in Davao called Cacao Culture Farms. So Kahlil messaged him and they eventually met in Davao. Kenneth gave Kahlil an overview of the industry and agreed to sell him some seeds. So he gave the seeds to his brother. You might even know Kahlil's brother. Kahlil's brother is Peter Corazo of Barangay Donuts. I'll link to that in the show notes as well. And so Peter makes delicious things from ingredients. Peter also mentioned that his friends in Tightrope are experimenting with sipping chocolate from Malagos, which Kahlil learned from Kenneth is one of the top cacao farms in the country. So Kahlil decided to drop by Tightrope, and it turned out that the sipping chocolate was still an experimental thing and not yet on the menu. So Kahlil had to insist strongly for Gabe, the owner of Tightrope, for Gabe to let Kahlil try it, explaining that he's seriously thinking of studying cacao. The place was so full that Kahlil sat in the large common table where a couple of guys were already having a meeting. He couldn't help but overhear their discussion. It was mostly about craft coffee and the craft coffee business. But the white guy kept on bringing up cacao. So when Gabe, the owner of Tightrope, served chocolate to Kahlil, Gabe mentioned that the guy was into cacao as well. So once they were done with their meeting, Kahlil introduced himself and was astounded by the crazy serendipity. Turns out, so the white guy, I don't want to say white guy, but that's what, that's what it says here. So that was Vassily. Okay. So that's how he met him. And it's interesting because in the podcast, as you listen, Vassily doesn't think it was crazy serendipity. But before we get to that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Vassily. But before we get to that, thank you to our sponsor, Scott Pacaldo. I've known Scott for a few years now. He's been working behind the scenes for Zerothreetwo, first as a photographer, then he used to post on our social media for us, and now he makes the video clips for the podcast. So if you follow us on Instagram, every now and then I'll post a clip from the Zerothreetwo Conversations, and then it's a clip, and then there's text there that says what the people are saying. So Scott is the one who makes that. He's very good at making social media material. So if you need random content like posters, sayings, quick videos, or a whole bunch of other things, he is your guy. You can reach him at scottpacaldo.com or follow him on Instagram at scottpacaldo. Thanks for sponsoring the podcast, Scott. And also, that said, for 2019, I'm looking to expand the number of advertisers for Zerothreetwo Conversations. So I finally made a pitch deck. I didn't realize how hard it is just to make a pitch deck. And then, I don't know, I'll start pitching the advertising on this podcast to companies or people with businesses. We'll see how that goes. But if you are interested in advertising on Zerothreetwo Conversations, feel free to contact me at info@zerothreetwo.com. And looking forward to working to like-minded individuals. No, seriously, like if I'm gonna accept sponsorship, it's gonna be from companies or products that I legitimately use. So I'm kind of excited for this. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, back to Vassily Lissouba. Again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Vassily, if you are listening to this, I apologize. I hope to meet you one day. Maybe we will run into each other in tightrope one of these days. But anyway, so Vassily, turns out he's a Canadian who's been traveling the world, consulting coffee shops and visiting cacao farms. When Kahlil learned this, he thought, how can I not study cacao after this? He thought about the serendipity and everything. So Vassily is an international coffee trainer and barista who cut his teeth at Anthony Benda's legendary Café Myriad in Montreal, Canada. Oh, maybe that's a cafe that I should visit one of these days. So, suffice to say, he's cut his teeth in specialty coffee, and he's obviously interested in chocolate and cacao, and turns out to be quite knowledgeable about the subject based on this interview. If this is your first time to listen to Zerothreetwo Conversations, please subscribe. We have a new episode every Tuesday. You can find us anywhere you can find podcasts. Heck, if you listen to Spotify, you can listen to Zerothreetwo Conversations on Spotify. Again, let's get to this interview with Kahlil Corazo and Vassily Lissouba. Kahlil will be interviewing Vassily, by the way, if that wasn't clear. So, I'm out.
Yeah, I mean, it started with something that is actually a big element of what I do in my life. Is that I was on Instagram, so I decided to start studying cacao and chocolate. So what I did is I went on Instagram and I just searched cacao chocolate, and I literally followed everyone. Mm-hmm. And I came across this one page, this guy, Chocolate Guru.
Yeah.
And I went on the page and I saw it was very different from the other chocolate people pages. It was something like historian, PhD on cacao history, professor at university in California. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote to him. I can't remember exactly what I wrote, but I was just, saying like, hey, I'm in Southeast Asia and I'm hearing that you're studying cacao history. I'd love to pick your brain about it. I was just curious. And he's the one who mentioned to me, he said, well, if you're in Asia, you should go to the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he said because the Philippines was historically a really important country for
Mm-hmm.
cacao. It was the first country outside of the Americas to receive cacao plants.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he went to describe how they actually, you know, they brought seedlings on the boat. They actually built, you know, special boxes for the seedlings on the boat during the trip from
the galleon
Acapulco
trade,
to the Philippines. And he said, so I recommend to go there. And I did a bit of research, and I saw that Davao was a big center for cacao in the Philippines. And I decided to just come here. It was a cheap flight, so why not?
Where were you back then when you were
in Bangkok, in Thailand?
Bangkok, and then, you're Canadian, right? So what brought you from Canada to Bangkok?
I mean, I'll try not to make this too long of a story, but I was working in Hawaii. I was doing a consulting job for a coffee shop. So I was doing the kind of job where this company got in touch with me because they were opening a coffee shop and they wanted someone to recommend them equipment, to design a workflow system, and also just to work there, you know, and to train the staff. So I lived there for 6 months doing that, and I actually got really burnt out. It was a really difficult job. It was, you know, anyone in the restaurant industry and food and beverage industry knows that openings can be really brutal, and especially this is not the kind of opening of just a small neighborhood coffee shop. This was a huge, you know, project. We on our first days of opening, we served, you know, more than 1,000 drinks.
Wow.
You know,
to give context to that, like for a shop here or like a coffee shop here in Cebu, how much coffee do they sell?
So when I asked what is the busiest shop in Cebu to someone here in the coffee industry, they mentioned a shop that serves about 200 drinks a day.
All right, that's the busiest.
Yeah.
And you're opening like 5 times that.
Yeah.
So that's really your background, the coffee shops and and what was your experience there? Like, is that your what you call this? Your entry into this world of beverage and taste?
Totally. So coffee is extremely complex. You know, some argue that it's more complex than wine, you know, than whiskeys. And it's complex in terms of taste, but what's really interesting about the job of a barista is that as opposed to a sommelier who's, you know, pouring wine, a sommelier goes around and talks a lot about the wine and where it comes from and how it's made, if they're a good sommelier, if they know their wines, and then they open the bottle and pour it, you know. A good barista, talks about the coffee, where it comes from, how it was made, how it tastes, and then they go and take the coffee grounds and the coffee beans, and they actually do the final process, which can make or break the coffee, and is a very scientific process, you know, involves a lot of precise measurement, you know, have to be aware of timing, of temperature, of pressure, of the method, you know. So we're actually craftsmen as well as we talk about the taste and also how it was made, how it comes from.
Okay.
So coffee is really interesting for that. You know, it's very rare that you get to work with a product that is so complex in terms of taste and actually be involved in making it while you're talking to the consumer about it.
So you're creating an experience both in the actual tasting of the coffee and the social experience.
Exactly.
Of I suppose it's also education.
Exactly.
Like for me, I mean, I know almost nothing about coffee, but you know, it's like I just appreciate it if when I drink something, I'll be taught as well. It's like why is this coffee special? So in Hawaii, you were already like consulting.
Yes.
So prior to that, I imagine you had a lot of experience.
Yeah.
In cafes and being barista and coffee.
I mean, it was, you know, it was my second job ever when I was 15. You know, so that was in a basic coffee shop, franchise in Canada. It's called Second Cup. It's like it's like a few degrees below Starbucks, and I'm not putting Starbucks in the high scale if people are wondering. And then So I did that for 2 years. And when I was 17, I started working for a specialty coffee shop, which I didn't even know existed at the time. I was lucky to find it. It really changed my life. So I was 17 then, and I'm 27.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what brought you from Canada? So which part of Canada did you come
Montreal.
from? Montreal.
Yeah.
And then you're French speaking, right? Yeah. Okay. And then what brought you from Canada to Hawaii?
Well, okay. So I was very lucky. I'm extremely lucky about all the things that have happened to me. And so that coffee shop I worked at, I didn't know when I started, I didn't know that kind of coffee shop existed. It was very new at the time. But on top of it, one of the owners of the shop was actually a consultant for coffee shop, specifically for roasting and opening coffee shops. And he also writes books. He's an author, writes books about how to make coffee. So I was so lucky to work with him. And coincidentally, I had just dropped out of high school at the time. So now this is not promoting for people to do that, but I dropped out of high school and I was super motivated. So I got into that job 100%. And, both of the owners of the shop really saw that in me, and they rewarding me by letting me learn, which is what I love to do most in the world. They let me learn and they rewarded me. They got me to be more involved. And after a few years, I decided, I've done many jobs in the restaurant business since, but I decided I wanted to start traveling. And that's when, so one of the owners of the shop, his name is Scott, he reached out to me and he said, hey, if you want to be traveling, how about I put you in touch with some of my clients who need someone to spend a few months with them at their shop, for their openings. So that's what brought me to Hawaii.
So you become like a coffee consultant, a coffee shop consultant or something like that.
Yeah, I don't like the wording consultant. I really don't like it, but I don't know any better way to say it. But it's just about, coffee shop is really about culture. There's a huge human element, and what a new shop is always lacking is one of the baristas, to be an extremely experienced person. Because in the end, that's what customers want. When they go into a coffee shop, I believe that they feel when the person serving them coffee is just experienced in the industry. And that is huge. Of course, training the staff is important. Setting up the workflow, the equipment, that's important. But, having that culture from the moment you open, I think is priceless. And I think that's what I brought to those places.
Right. And then, so we met in a coffee shop here in Cebu.
Yeah.
And it was a crazy serendipity.
Yeah.
Because, in the
but
past...
it's not. But it's not. That's the thing. It's not crazy serendipity. Because that happens almost every time I go to a coffee shop.
Oh, yeah?
And that's why coffee shops are amazing.
Yeah, man.
Because of the human element. I feel extremely comfortable in coffee shops. Like I said, I've worked in cafes since I'm 15 years old. And I actually learned to become comfortable on a human level, socially, in coffee shops. I used to actually hate, human interactions. Like social interactions. I was awful at it. And I became comfortable with it in coffee shops. So I'm in a biased state, because when I go to a coffee shop, I am so myself. I am so comfortable. And I hope to think that I'm very approachable. I think it's very easy. If someone sees me in a coffee shop and they want to talk to me, I think that in a subconscious way, I will make it very easy for that to happen. You and I met, we were both sitting in a communal table, on a tightrope, which is...
Because it was full, I had to sit there, and then...
Well, I sat there on purpose.
Yeah, okay.
I sat there on purpose because I thought I want to meet people, and when I went to Tightrope, I went there because I wanted to drink good coffee, but I also went there because I thought I want to meet like-minded people.
Yeah.
And where else can you do that than in a place that serves coffee for, 20 times the price that you could get somewhere else if you weren't picky?
Yeah.
And like, why are we all making that decision? Why are we all spending that money there? Because we have something in common, because we care about taste, or we care about agriculture or local products, or so all of us who go to those shops, we can have a conversation together, so it's just, if you open yourself to talking to people, you may meet really incredible people in those environments, I think.
And then what you call this, since your sort of entire journey has been around taste, starting with coffee, and then with chocolate and cacao. Before we go into the whole cacao, world, it's like, how could we, like, personally, I'd like to expand my vocabulary in terms of taste or smell, or like, how could I appreciate chocolate better and share that experience? Or so how could I start becoming better at having more, say, colors in my taste?
So I think it's quite simple. Taste, and when we speak of flavor, is actually the word that we use. When we talk about flavor, we incorporate taste, which is, which comes from the taste buds on your tongue. So we're talking about sweetness, saltiness, acidity, bitterness, these kind of things. But we also talk about smell. And a lot of people get confused because, people think of smelling like you're smelling some flowers, so what does that have to do with eating chocolate? But we actually smell a lot when we're eating something, our ability to smell does interact with the oral consumption of a product. And you can experiment that very easily by, closing your nose and drinking a glass of orange juice or something, and you'll be able to taste it. You'll be able to taste the sweetness and the acidity of the juice, but you won't be able to smell the smell of the orange or whatever it is you're consuming. And smell is actually the most important aspect of these complex products like coffee, like chocolate, like wine, like whiskey. So in my mind, if you want to expand your vocabulary on taste, on smell, you need to expose yourself. It's very important. Why? Because especially for a smell, I'm not so familiar with the exact science of it, but what I know is that our ability to smell things is directly connected to your memory. It's completely interlinked, and you can think of it in a very simple way, which is when you're talking about the smell of something, you're always comparing to something. We have no way to talk about the smell of something without comparing it to a previous experience. You have no way. If you're smelling something, you're saying, oh, it smells minty. But what does minty mean? If you've never smelled mint in your life, what does minty mean? Right? It smells like jasmine. What does that mean if you've never smelled a jasmine flower? And when you understand that, you realize that if you don't expose yourself to nature, which is where all of the smells come from, then you'll never be able to talk about it. You'll never be able to compare it. Or if you've smelled jasmine but only 20 years ago, then you'll barely be able to recall it. So I think the first homework should be go out there and smell things. Go to the local market, smell of fruit, smell vegetables, smell flowers, and ask people for the name of the flowers. Otherwise you'll only ever be able to say, oh, it's this flower here. It smells like that flower I smelled the other day, but I don't know what it's called. So that's the first step, I think, to expose yourself to smells. The second step is to gain confidence. a lot of people actually feel really self-conscious about talking about the smell of things, because they think that they're wrong. They think that they're not good enough. And, you just have to throw yourself out there. You just have to say the first thing that comes to mind, Don't overthink it, and really relate it to your own experiences. And you may not come up with the same words that someone else comes up with because you have different life experiences.
Yeah.
And something I find really interesting, I ask myself, sometimes you'll drink some wines, some French white wines, for example, that have pineapple smell, or banana smell. And I ask myself, how were people describing those wines back in the days that they had never seen or tasted a pineapple or banana in their life, because it doesn't grow in France.
Yeah.
Right? But they've been making those wines for longer than they've tasted bananas and pineapples, so it's interesting, and I think that as, the world becomes more global, and as products are being traded more, you're able to eat a fresh mango in Canada in the winter, I think that our sense of smell is expanding, our vocabulary is expanding, so those are things I find interesting.
Cool. Is there a special training for like baristas or people who are like professional tasters? Like you have to, produce coffee as a certain standard, and I suppose you use your taste there and smell.
Yeah, there are, and I actually don't consider myself an expert in tasting and smelling, but there are some kits that people buy that will have like 50 different oils that each represent a smell, and people go through exercises where they open it up and smell it without knowing what it is, and they have to make a guess to what that is.
Just training your memory on what the thing is.
Yeah.
Okay.
The issue, I think it's great exercise. The issue I have with it is that a lot of the time those are synthetic smells, and they actually are not really present in coffee or in chocolate or in wine. But it does train you to it's like reaction time training. You smell something and you think, oh yeah, strawberry, or you smell something and vanilla. So I think that's cool. But I like the organic approach, which is one of the reasons why I got interested in farming, because I wanted to expose myself to smells. And what better place to do that than a farm that grows fruits and vegetables and herbs and flowers, So yes, there are ways, and I think that the people who are the best tasters and smellers in the world do use those tricks, they do use those boxes, but I actually don't think that if you want to be successful in the industry, you need to be that well-versed in smelling. And I can give you a short example. I actually I ran a sort of chocolate tasting room.
Where is this?
In Bangkok.
Okay.
In Thailand. So people would come in and we had a few chocolates that we were offering people to taste. And it was really nice interactive space, really intimate, very small space. Maybe 5 people would come in at a time. And what I would do, and it's a bit of another story how I learned to do that, but what I would do is I would come in first thing in the morning, and the first customer who'd come in, I would get them to taste my chocolates. And what I would do is I would try my best to create a completely non-judgmental space. Just try to get this guest to feel as comfortable as possible with me. And then I would just ask them, what does it taste like to you? And they would tell me. And I found that the answers that this person who doesn't think they're a professional and who feels really comfortable, the answers that person tells me are golden. I would do that for my first 2-3 interactions and actually get other people's perspective on how it tastes, not only my own. And for the rest of that day, people would come in and I would tell them, oh yeah, and this chocolate has,
repeating what they said.
What they said, what people told me before. So not even my own experience of it, because I think that's too small. I prefer to base what I communicate with my guests on a few people's experience of the product. And what better people to use than other customers who came in before them, who probably have so much in common with them, you know, because you're dealing with a particular target audience.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
And
so I imagine they have similar language, a similar life experience than you. Yeah?
Exactly.
Okay.
So I think there's ways around it, you know, and also people care, I think, about the story a lot. You know, of course the product has to be good. And of course it's interesting if it tastes like, like strawberries, or it's interesting if you're able to tell a customer, well, what kind of things do you like, you know, and what kind of things do you not like, and be able to recommend them something. But my personal experience with chocolate is that people have personal preferences based on taste, on sweetness, bitterness, acidity, specifically with chocolate. For smell, they're not that picky. Smell is interesting. What they really, you know, what will stop them from buying a chocolate is if they taste it and they say, it's too bitter. It's too acidic, you know, it's too sweet. And I think those are very easy things to notice. If you work in the industry, I think the sense of taste is actually quite obvious.
Okay.
You know, so that I think is very important. You should know the taste of your chocolate. You should know the sweetness. You should know the bitterness. You should know the acidity. When you know that, then you can make recommendations to the customer. And you let the smell become this extra surprise, like a bonus, something they didn't expect. Because that's what is so unique about what we do in the specialty chocolate industry, is that we're offering people chocolates that smell like flowers. We're offering people chocolate that, you know, that smell like fruit naturally, without adding anything to it. And that's unusual. So if you can give people a chocolate that has the sweetness they desire, has the level of bitterness they desire, have the level of acidity that they are interested to discover, then the smell comes as this extra thing.
All right. So let's go deeper into this world of chocolate. So you were in Bangkok. You met this cacao PhD guy from California online, and then you messaged him. You found out about the Philippines. So when did you make your first trip here?
It was a year and a half ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did it go?
It was amazing. Okay. It was honestly one of the best trips of my life.
All right. So where did you go here in the Philippines?
I went to Mindanao.
Okay.
Yeah. I decided to go to Mindanao very consciously because, well, firstly because I'd heard that Davao is a big center for cacao here in the Philippines. And secondly because, and I'm not making recommendations here, but because I obviously had heard that there are travel warnings to go to Mindanao, that it's an unsafe place. And I thought to myself, well, if there are farmers in Mindanao and yet there's very little tourism, then how do those farmers get exposed? How do people get to know about those farmers if they're avoiding that area? So I thought those are the places that will be very interesting for me, because farmers will find it exciting probably for a foreigner to be there and to be interested in what they're doing, and they'll be more likely to be accepting of me, because I had nothing to offer them. I had nothing. I came in, as just wearing a small backpack, and I would knock at people's doors or just show up, and say, "Hey, I'm interested in cacao farming. Can I see what you guys are doing?" And I thought that in Mindanao, because there's much less tourism, people would be quicker to appeal to my presence.
So you entered Davao. And then you spent a few months going around Mindanao. What was your game plan there?
I entered Cagayan de Oro.
Cagayan de Oro, okay.
Yeah, I took the boat from Bohol.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just got on a bus, and I met people on the bus, just like I meet people
yeah?
in coffee shops. I would take a bus because, like I said, again, like this is Mindanao. It's weird for a foreigner to be there. So people would come and talk to me and be like, what are you doing? And I would tell them I'm looking for cacao farms.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, there's this guy on the back of the bus who's saying, oh, cacao farm. My cousin has an uncle who has a farm, and they would tell me where it is, and I would just go,
So where was this first farm?
In Bukidnon.
Bukidnon, okay.
Yeah.
So you went to Cagayan, rode a bus.
I took the bus to
and then
Balay.
talking to people.
Yeah.
And somebody recommended a farm.
Yeah. Exactly.
And you went there, and then what happened next?
I went to the farm. It was nothing interesting. It was just a big, it was still cool, for me because I didn't know if I'd be successful, so it was really rewarding because I felt like, okay, like this is possible, because there's no information like this. You can't go online and, search, cacao farm Mindanao and like people's Instagram page comes, like they don't have Instagram pages, So I just had to go. So I went to Bukidnon. I went down to Davao, and obviously in Davao I went to the obvious places. There's Sidami, which is an organization that helps cacao farmers specifically in Mindanao. I went to Malagos. I tried going to some of Auro's cacao farms around Davao, but at the time they were not established enough, and it was very difficult to get in touch with them, so I couldn't make it. I did that, and then I ventured off to other parts of Mindanao. I went to San Isidro because I heard that San Isidro has a reputation for being a town built by cacao.
Where's San Isidro?
San Isidro is north of Tagum City. So you're taking the bus.
So it's within Davao?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I'm not sure which region or province it is, but it's Tagum City is about an hour bus ride from Davao, and from then you're taking another bus maybe for another hour going north.
Yeah. So what would be your? I'm just curious. What would be your introduction? You arrive in a farm, and how would you win their trust and then get in there and befriend them? What's your style there?
I don't have a system. I maybe I should have a system, but it's worked out for me not having a system. But the best is to have some kind of introduction. So there's two farms specifically I can think of. One was actually a crazy serendipity moment where I was coming back from San Isidro and my phone actually stopped working, which is a devastating thing for a traveler.
Yeah.
And it was very complicated because I depended on my phone to transfer banking into my card and get money out. So my phone was just not working anymore, and I didn't know what to do. And for some reason, this is how my personality works. I thought to myself, well, my phone's not working. I'm really stressed. I don't know what to do. So I should go to the beach and relax. So I took a van and went to Mati.
Okay. Yeah.
And I stayed there for a few days. I stayed at this Argentinian man's house. He'd been living there for 10 years. And luckily, I was able to meet a tricycle driver who had a friend who fixed phones and was able to fix my phone there, which was a really relieving moment. And I went back to the house, and I was full of joy. Yeah. So finally had nice conversations with my host, this Argentinian guy. And when he asked me what I was doing here, and I told him, he said to me that he knew of someone around Maragusan who has a cacao farm. And he told me that he had their phone number somewhere and could put me in touch. So he did that. He gave me a phone number. He gave them a call first to tell them I was coming. And they said that they'd be expecting me. So from Mati, I took a bus to Nabunturan and met with one of the guys from this team who took me to their chocolate factory. And then, they ended up taking me to their cacao farm, which was a whole crazy story of being three guys on a motorbike going up the mountain, on a rainy evening for a 2-hour ride.
Wow.
It was terrible. But I guess that simple introduction, really made it easy. And another thing that makes it easy, I think, is just as a traveler to be open, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll give you those same people when I met them on our way to the cacao farm. They asked me if I like to eat durian, which I do. I like to eat durian a little bit, and they said, okay, come. And, we sat down on a table with a street vendor.
Mm-hmm.
He picked a durian. So he opened up this one durian for the three of us, and we're eating them. And they're telling me, are you enjoying it? I said, sure, yeah. And he said, all right. And he asked for a second one. Opened the second one, and we're all, eating, and he's telling me, are you enjoying it? And I said, yeah, sure. And so he got a third one. And we ended up eating 3 durian for the three of us. And I think that just that openness, to doing things the way that they do it, even though I wouldn't eat a durian to myself normally, I think that openness is something people connect with, is just to feel like, okay, this guy is, happy to eat the same food that we eat, to drink the same drinks that we drink, and I think that's all. Yeah.
Cool. And then, so how much time have you spent in Mindanao, like after that?
I was in Mindanao for a month total.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for a month. It was
for the first time, but you've been going back there ever since?
Yeah, it's my 4th time in the Philippines now. I plan to go back to Mindanao next month or in the coming weeks. But I love coming back as much as I can. I really enjoy spending time in the Philippines, especially in the regions.
And what have you learned while there in Mindanao?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned many things. I've learned about farming. Because on my second trip, I actually, I don't know how or why, but I got to connect with the guys at Malagos really well. And on my second trip,
so for those people who are not, I only knew about Malagos maybe a year ago,
right?
So, could you describe what they are in the local chocolate scene?
Long story short, I think Malagos is one of the leaders in terms of tree-to-bar chocolate production. That is making chocolate from a company that grows their own trees. And of course, they still buy cacao from neighboring farmers, which is something you have to do if you want to grow. Because if you depend only on your own production, you're limited by that. But if you're doing very good fermentation and very good drying, then you can buy from local farmers and you can have a higher production. And Malagos is very well established, very respected in the industry. They do very well. Every time there's a chocolate awards, in Europe, the chocolate is usually awarded. They recently got awarded for their cacao being of higher loom taste, which essentially means that it doesn't mean that the trees are necessarily a ancient variety of tree. It means that the flavor profile is very unique, essentially, and very interesting to people. Essentially, that's what it means. So they do a really great job. And yeah, I connected well with them. And on my second trip, I let them know ahead of time I was coming and asked them if I could learn about farming from them. So they invited me to come and spend a week, in their facility, learning about grafting, learning about taking care of plants, pruning, harvest, the fermentation. And I think what I learned is that the Philippines actually has a really great training program in place for someone who wants to plant cacao. It has a really solid program, and Malagos is not the only company that does it. Sidami does it, and
Sidami,
okay. CIDAMI does it. They offer, I think, what they call cacao doctor training.
Is that a government institution?
No. It's I'm sure they have some fundings from government, but I believe they're a non-for-profit.
It's like an association of cacao growers or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
They may be for. I'm really not sure, but their goal is to educate, regardless of whether they make money from it or not, which is not a bad thing if you do.
Yeah. Cool. And then, so could you tell me about maybe I almost know nothing about cacao. Like, I learned a lot from you when we were discussing, and my friend, shout out to Kenneth. Yeah, he's the guy who started his farm with his IT job. I don't know if you've heard of cacao culture farms. They're based in Davao. Anyway, I connect him with you when you visit there. Maybe you guys could talk. And how just give me a brief overview of the industry. But like, how would you describe the process from like the farming until it reaches us as like consumers as chocolate or sipping chocolate?
Yeah. Well, to describe the process that affects the end product, there's obviously the agricultural aspect of it. That is ensuring that your soil is well taken care of. That it's full of nutrients, whether you're using fertilizer or homemade fertilizer methods if you're going organic. Making sure that you're protecting your trees from pests, from disease, which can be done by actually pruning your tree, by cutting off excess branches in your tree so that the moisture that gets accumulated from rainfall is able to evaporate efficiently. If your tree is very bushy, very dense in foliage, then it's difficult for the water to evaporate, and moisture draws bacterial growth. So, there's mechanical methods to avoid that. Then there's also selecting varieties of trees that are resistant to particular disease or pests. There's some cacao farmers who literally wrap every single one of their fruits with plastic to protect them from a pest. It's very common in the Philippines and is actually, it's horrible that we're using plastic, and I wish that there's a better method. I know people are making plastic bags from cassava starch, but it's really important.
Back in the day, I remember like trees with fruits wrapped in newspaper. I suppose it was better than plastic.
Yes, but I think it doesn't achieve the similar result, because you actually need to protect the fruit so that when the bug gets on it's just really uninterested in the plastic and goes away. And the newspaper would have to really hermetically seal the fruit, which would take, I think, a lot of effort, because we're doing this for every single fruit.
That would be an interesting problem to look at.
Yeah. So after that, obviously the harvest of the fruits, picking fruits that are ripe only, not picking underripe fruits, not letting fruits get overripe on the tree. And with cacao, it's very tricky to tell the ripeness, because depending on the variety of the tree, the color changes differently. So you really just need to know your trees, and be able to estimate the correct ripeness. After that, we're breaking pods. So the cacao pod is something like the shell of a pumpkin that you're breaking open, and inside there's many seeds covered with a small mucilage or white flesh. If you can picture a mangosteen, similar to the seeds of a mangosteen, like that. So we're collecting those wet seeds, and we actually have to ferment them. So cacao is a fermented product. We're gathering those seeds, putting them in large wooden boxes, and leaving them to ferment for a few days, maybe up to a week. Different farmers have different methods on fermentation. When you're satisfied with your fermentation, you then lay the cacao to dry on raised tables with mesh bottoms to allow for airflow. With a mix of direct sunlight and also, putting them in a greenhouse so that the sun is not too harsh. The process takes, between 4 to 10 days, depending on the weather pattern, or even longer if it happens to be raining a lot, which can be very difficult. And then you have, cacao seeds that are ready to be sold to a chocolatier. The chocolatier then will have to roast the seeds. He'll have to winnow them, which means removing the husk from the seed, the skin from the outside of the seed, and then grind it into a paste. So after removing the husk from the seed, the chocolatier will then grind it into a paste, almost think like a peanut butter. And that's at that point, that's when people make tablea. If you want to make finer chocolate, you'll have to take that paste and run it through a stone grinder to actually refine it until the particle size becomes so small that your tongue is not able to feel it anymore. So you're going from something that is fairly coarse to something that is sandy to something that becomes like very, very fine sand to something that you can't even taste anymore. You can't even feel the grittiness anymore. And that's the magic of chocolate.
There's also this part like they call tempering, right? What happens there?
So chocolate is made first, and then chocolate is tempered. So when you're tempering chocolate, you're using a process of manipulating the temperature of the chocolate in order to transform the fat crystals of the chocolate to have a shape that gives them a really pleasant mouthfeel. To really simplify the concept. So you're changing the shape of the molecules, the fat molecules in the chocolate, so that in your mouth the experience is really pleasant.
And how do you manipulate that? It's through the temperature?
Yeah, you're using temperature. So usually if you're doing it the artisanal way, you'll use a big piece of marble, because marble has a very smooth texture, so the chocolate won't get stuck into some cracks like wood, won't get absorbed. And marble, if it's a thick piece, has an ability to retain heat really well. So you want to start with a cold piece of marble.
Okay.
And that cold marble will have the ability to cool down the chocolate really efficiently. So you're starting off with chocolate that you're melting carefully until until all the fat crystals are completely melted. Then you're pouring it on the marble. You're cooling it down carefully until it reaches a particular temperature. Then you're reheating it. And you then have chocolate that is ready to be put in the fridge to cool down into a solid block and yet have the really smooth texture that came with that process.
So it's a matter of like increasing and decreasing the temperature until this fat molecules have a particular form or something. Yeah,
exactly. Which makes chocolate difficult in the tropics because once chocolate has been tempered, it can go out of temper. If you're taking that chocolate and you're carrying it outside and it's 35 degrees out and the chocolate just melts and gets really hot and then goes solid again in a non-controlled way, it may get out of temper, which will affect the enjoyment of the chocolate. The chocolate is still good. It's not. It hasn't gone bad. It's still good, but it won't be as enjoyable.
The flavor is the same, but the texture is different.
The texture is different.
Okay. And I heard that from my friend Kenneth that he heard as well in the seminar that he attended that 60% of the chocolate's flavor is from the fermentation. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know about numbers, but it is a very, very big part of it. So fermentation is when molecules that are responsible for flavor get complexified. That's when really interesting things happen. If you're comparing to wine, compare the taste of grape juice to the taste of wine. And of course wine is aged, and aging does transform the flavor a lot, but the fermentation process alone still changes the flavor greatly. You can tell if you drink a really fresh batch of wine. Maybe it'll lack the complexity of aged wine, but it's still very different from grape juice.
Yeah. Well, coffee is fermented as well, right?
Yes.
And beer and whiskey, all those things are products of fermentation. So if we go deeper into that, I'm very interested in this area. Like, how is cacao fermented? What's the process there?
So, like I said, once you're breaking the pod, you're collecting the wet seeds, the seeds that are still covered with mucilage, with this very thin flesh, which is slightly sweet, a little bit acidic. And you're collecting that and putting it into a large wooden box.
Like how large would these things be? Like in the farm, they would have these structures. Huh?
So they're actually very simple. They're very simple structures. They're very easy to build. A cabinet maker could very easily build one. They're essentially just wooden boxes that have holes drilled at the bottom so that the juice can drain out. Now, how large are they? It depends on your production. Now, there is a minimum size because fermentation is a process that requires a build-up and accumulation of heat. If you were working with a size that was too small, the heat being built up from the fermentation would go out into the atmosphere too quickly. If you're using a larger batch of cacao, then that mass is insulating that heat, containing that heat, so that you can have the right environment created for bacterial growth. So usually we say that 40 kilos is a minimum for that. And the box used for a 40 kilos batch of cacao would be about 50 centimeters cube.
Okay.
But farmers usually use boxes that hold about 250 kilos or even 400 kilos of cacao.
Okay. And then, like, how do they control the fermentation speed or the heat and all these things?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways. So one is just by waiting. If you leave something to ferment, something will happen. Things happen. That's what happens with your garbage. When especially if you're cooking with natural products, if you're cooking with vegetables and fruits, and you're throwing the peels into your garbage, and you let your garbage sit for a week, it starts to smell funky. And that's fermentation. So the same thing happens with cacao, just by waiting, just by letting the temperature rise and letting bacterial grow. You allow processes to happen. Now, a second thing you can do is incorporating air into the ferment, and you do that by stirring it. When you incorporate air into the fermentation, you change the type of fermentation that it is. You change the way that bacterials grow. And on top of that, you also change the rate of the temperature rising. Once you stir, you're actually, you're helping bacteria to grow. As bacteria grow, they release carbon dioxide and heat. So you're helping the heat to raise to an extent. I think I think you could overstir in a way that you're bringing too much air in and actually lowering the temperature, because we're talking about fermentations reach temperatures as high as 40 degrees, 45 degrees, so hotter than the outside air. So stirring is one way, and how a farmer can achieve a particular quality of fermentation is by having the right timing of how long they wait and how often they stir. Now, this is well known in the cacao industry. Farmers usually know that when you ferment your cacao, you wait a certain amount of time, and then you stir, and you wait a certain amount of time again, and stir again, and you do it for a certain amount of times. But now, the issue is that almost everyone is just following what they heard someone else is doing. They heard that someone was stirring 3 times over the course of 6 days, and so they decided to do that. And if you go to the bottom of it, you realize that the very first person who did it also did it because they heard of it somewhere. It's very rare that you see someone who's doing it because they actually researched what happens if you stir at a certain point or at another. Now there's a few farmers. I only know of one really in the Philippines who is spending capital in researching fermentation. Working with international consultants for that.
When you say researching, do you mean like finding the right fermentation formula for that particular bean?
Exactly. Finding out how often you want to stir and how long you want the process to last, and using measurements of temperature and also measurements of pH in order to make intelligent decisions. Not just making decisions because it sounds nice to stir every 2 days, or because it's, 2 is a nice number, or because they want it to be easy to remember. No, we're doing it, based on real data, a scientific method.
Yeah. And then that would be the fermentation would produce different types of fermentation processes or formulas will produce different flavors. Is that the result?
Well, now I don't know about the scientific details behind it, but of course the flavor will be different because if you're allowing bacteria to grow a certain way and that is changing the molecules that affect flavor in cacao, then yes, having a different interaction of the bacteria on the same group of molecules will produce different results. If you do things differently, the final result will be different.
So right now it's really a matter of experimentation. You do this one kind of fermentation, and then you produce a certain kind of result, and then you taste it, said, okay, I like this one, or this one I don't like, so we'll go with this. Is that what people researching their fermentation would be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that that's the approach they're taking. I hope that it's an approach that is linked to taste, as well as having a cacao that has a good visual appearance, because that's very important. When you're selling cacao on the market, chocolatiers will base their purchase a lot by visual appearance.
So what are they buying? Is it the what you call this? Fermented cacao, which is dried as well.
Yes, they're buying dried fermented cacao.
Which looks like
it looks like an almond.
Almond, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a slightly bigger, more plump than an almond. But yeah, if you imagine just a sack full of seeds about the size and shape of an almond, and when I say visual appearance of it, that is just how, are the seeds uniform? Do they all look the same? Are some of them really flat? Are some of them broken? Which are all signs of what happened from the farmer's side. And not only the fermentation, but also, the harvest. Did the farmer ferment on the same day that they harvested? Or did they wait several days? Did they buy wet seeds from other farmers who actually broke the pods a week ago? All of those things matter. So the chocolatiers are basing a lot of their decision based on visual appearance. But now fermentation can produce visually pleasing cacao that doesn't taste interesting. You have to push fermentation to a certain extent in order to have interesting taste. And that's the really intriguing thing, is that if you made chocolate from non-fermented cacao, it wouldn't taste good. The flavors are really developed from the fermentation.
So I'm interested in the business connecting, or the economics, and then the relationships connecting all this industry. So first it comes from the farmers, right? And then it's being fermented sometimes with the farmers themselves, or like a bigger farm like Malagos. And then either they could create their own chocolates like Malagos, or I imagine they would also sell it to chocolatiers. That's how you call them, right? Yeah,
so that is an interesting option for farmers, actually, is to make your own chocolate and to sell it as either as large blocks or as chips for chocolatiers to then do the tempering process, then melt it and transform it into goods. That is helpful here in the Philippines because with the complexities of tempering and with the difficulties of shipping, it's difficult to make products that will find their way to the consumers intact in terms of tempering. So it is, I think, a nice approach to just make chocolates that it doesn't matter if it's tempered or not.
So tablea.
Like tablea, but the problem with tablea is that tablea is not fine enough. When we talk about tablea, usually we refer to minimally processed cacao. So cacao that's only been ground until it turns into a rough paste, but not so fine until it's completely smooth. And if you gave a chocolatier chocolate that is not perfectly fine, it doesn't make sense for them because that means they have to remelt it and grind it again, which is redundant. Grinding should only happen once.
So I imagine some farmers here would be selling to like companies like Aro and other chocolate makers here. Do they also export in other countries?
So, if you're talking about exporting seeds, so of course, there's American chocolate makers who are now using some Filipino cacao. I know Asquino seed is one of them. They buy cacao from Davao region.
These are like specialists.
These are specialty chocolate companies. Yes. So my friends in South Cotabato, they regularly export their cacao to Europe and is then sold to multiple European chocolate makers to use their cacao. But of course, there's export. I think in 2018, 4,000 tons of cacao was exported from the Philippines, which is actually small compared to the full production of the country. But it does get exported. In my opinion, not enough. In my opinion, it is nice that you're able to sell chocolate locally. But I think if we want the industry to grow and if we want the Philippines to be recognized as a quality cacao producer, we need to get the word out there. We need to get more people, more chocolatiers, international chocolatiers to use Filipino cacao and talk about it.
Yeah, you mentioned in our first conversation, like Morocco or not this island in Africa, what's the name? Madagascar, like suddenly came out of the scene and then became like this global player in chocolate because of one man. What's the story there?
Well, I can only speak of the basic details because I wasn't there. But Akesan is one company, one person or family that's been involved in cacao planting in Madagascar for, I think, the last 20 or 25 years. And what happened is that about 15 years ago, one of the family members decided to take charge of the operation, and improve on the quality and also, get the cacao out there internationally into the world, and from what I heard, I'm actually new to the industry, but from what I heard 15 years ago, people did not know Madagascar as a quality cacao producer. And the interesting thing now is that if you talk to chocolatiers, all over the world, they will mention Madagascar at some point. They will say, oh yes, Madagascar cacao has a very distinct fruity profile, it's very high quality. And I think that's so amazing that 15 years ago, no one knew about it, no one talked about it, and today it's known as one of the best, and I wonder, could we do the same thing in the Philippines?
Yeah. And who are these chocolate makers who decide on who are the top producers and who would be the attractive customers for our cacao?
That's a very good question because my background is in specialty. I deal with people who love to do the highest quality of things. There's an issue with that is that the market for specialty is actually very small if you compare it to the production of cacao. I was on the phone with a farmer today who told me that they can produce 80 tons per month. And I thought to myself, if I gathered all the chocolatiers I know in America who make specialty chocolate, and I got every single one of them to buy a significant quantity of cacao to their standard from this one farm, that would barely make a dent in that farmer's production. So what do we do with the rest? And I think the rest is usually made by larger companies, usually in Europe, to be used for the candy industry, which is much less of a specialty industry, or also to be used in what I considered as candy chocolate bars, but some may consider it as very high quality chocolate bars, but the usual European companies, But even better than that, we could have a local player here in the Philippines make high volume chocolates and export internationally. But I think it would have to be exported internationally.
Great. And then, great.
And actually, I'd like to mention one more thing, actually. I recently heard that there may be multiple, but there's at least one chocolate maker here in the Philippines that is a Belgian family making chocolate here, and that has a significant chocolate production, and yet uses no Filipino grown cacao beans.
But they're located here?
They're located here
That's crazy.
around Manila region. They produce a significant amount of chocolate, and yet
for local consumption?
No, for export. For export. And they use no local grown cacao bean because they just don't know that there's good quality being produced here, and they haven't invested, they haven't spent the time.
Where did they get their cacao? Would you know?
I think it would be from countries like Ecuador, Colombia, Guatemala, maybe Ghana, Ivory Coast, the common cacao producing countries in the world. And so to me, I think to myself, if there are local, chocolate makers here who are doing significant quantity and are using no Filipino beans, I think those are the people that we should convince to, maybe look for local options. Even if it was for, parts of their production, it would still be a great contribution.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to talk with them, and then I'm sure they've checked out the local scene. Maybe there's a gap in our production and the quality and all that, but it's something definitely which could be remedied. I mean, it could be like this, the process, or it could be the seeds themselves. But definitely, I mean, there are interesting opportunities in this area. And then there was something that surprised me in our first conversation, which is that, as mentioned earlier, I was mentioning, I grew up with tablea and sikwate, cacao, and you mentioned, it's unique, it doesn't happen all over the world. It's like even in Guatemala, which is where's a producer of cacao. I mean, it doesn't happen, no?
It happens in Mexico.
In Mexico.
In certain areas of Mexico, it does happen, and the culture is very strong. And the beauty of the Philippines is that we got the cacao culture from Mexico directly, 500 years ago. And that culture stuck, and now it's very common. I meet young people and I talk to them about chocolate, about tablea and sikwate, and the common answer will be, oh yeah, my grandmother used to make that when I was a kid. And even yesterday, I was in Guadalupe, and just off the side of the street, there's this woman who's, selling sikwate and putomaya, and I thought, like, how amazing is that, that you can get this very traditional product, just off the side of the road, it's incredible.
Yeah, we take it for granted here, but it's amazing. It turns out very few places in the world have that.
Of course, people in Europe talk about traditional chocolate drinks, and they'll mention, taking a spoonful of cocoa powder and mixing it into milk. And how is that traditional? That's not traditional at all. Cacao powder is actually something that's very difficult to extract from chocolate, and it's something very recent, all things considered. The traditional way of making chocolate drinks is from pure chocolate, and very specifically from coarsely ground cacao. And the way that it's produced here in the Philippines is also very beautiful, with the batirol, with the carved wooden whisk, and just water, which I find fascinating. Just mixing water and cacao together and whisking it over heat in a very specific way gives you a beverage that has the texture, as if you put milk into it, even though it's just pure water. And I think the health benefits, if you're not overloading it with sugar, are fantastic.
Yeah, I remember, it's like when I was a kid, I would make that myself. My grandmother used to create tablea, and she noticed that I was so into it that she put in the effort to show me the whole process.
That's awesome.
From the tree.
That's amazing.
To the, drying it, remove the pods. I remember, I was like, I treasure all these memories.
Where else in the world, can you have that?
Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought like this would, I didn't even think of that. I was they took it for granted that this would happen in other places. But yeah, it's like this come full circle. I might spend the next 2 to 4 years specializing in this. And yeah, man, it's an amazing story.
I mean, for me, I think something that is so important is for people to keep the sikwate culture alive. Mm-hmm. For people to keep being interested in sikwate, in traditionally made chocolate drinks, mm-hmm. especially using water. Not necessarily making a modern version with milk or with milk powder and those things, but mm-hmm. just keeping the natural, culture alive. Because for me as a foreigner, I can say it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think it's so beautiful. And when I was traveling around Mindanao, that's what actually fueled, literally and metaphorically, mm-hmm. my travels. Mm-hmm. Was when I would wake up, early in the morning at 5 a.m. and go to the public markets mm-hmm. and sit, around all those usually older people. Yeah. Drinking sikwate and eating putumaya. I found that culturally, that's beautiful. Mm-hmm. That's really beautiful. And what a shame that we're not seeing young people there. I mean, I understand young people don't like to wake up at that time, but what a shame that it's only, the older generation that is still embracing that. Mm-hmm. And what will happen in the future? Mm-hmm. I hope we don't lose it. Yeah. And so I hope there's a way we can keep that sikwate culture alive, and maybe represented internationally as the way that chocolate drinks should be made. I think it would be fantastic.
Cool. So, Vassily, where could people know more about you or contact you if you're interested to know about cacao and what you're doing now and helping farmers or getting in contact with farmers?
I'm actually a very private person. Mm-hmm. I do plan on launching maybe a website or an Instagram page just that would help connect farmers with anyone.
Yeah.
Just so that people know and just for me to take photos of some of the farms that I go to and, mm-hmm. and write up who is in charge of this and having the ability for people to get their contact information. Right now, unfortunately, that's not existent, but we can definitely keep in touch, and I'll, keep you in the loop. And when I have that launch, we can talk about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, man. This has been very interesting, and then looking forward to doing more collaborations with you in this world of cacao.
Yeah, totally. That would be awesome.
Thank you. Right. Cool.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Chocolate happens to be one of my weaknesses. I would be interested to learn more about this, or maybe just get a taste of legitimately good coffee. I'll be honest, I can't tell the difference between legitimately good chocolate, because I can't tell the difference between good chocolate or bad chocolate. Similar before when specialty coffee wasn't a thing yet in Cebu. And then you just kept drinking the same coffee from all the usual places. And then finally, a specialty coffee shop opened. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, this is what coffee tastes like. And I wonder if it's going to be the same for chocolate. I wonder if that's going to be a thing here. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you support the show. There are 4 ways to support 032 Conversations. You can become a Patreon subscriber. Head on over to patreon.com/032. You can buy 032 merchandise at the Assembly online. We're at assembly.032.com. You can share this episode on social media. Go ahead and share it. The more listeners we get, the bigger the chances are of us continuing to do this. And the 4th way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating on iTunes. Tell iTunes you like the show so iTunes suggests this show to more people. I'll see you next Tuesday for another 032 Conversation.